It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody, where every week we seek inspiration from great men and great women to be the heroes and heroines of our own lives. You are here with your hosts. I am Andrew Bernstein. You are Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
I am doing great, Andy. Ready to laugh out loud as we cover an American writer, speaker, and humorist who challenged the social norms and changed literature in the process.
Yes, laugh out loud is correct. And we are talking about, of course, the immortal Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known to the world as by his nom de plume of Mark Twain.
Yes.
Whose dates were 1835 to 1910. And talk about laugh out loud. I just reread Huckleberry Finn, finished it a couple of weeks ago. And the ending, I don't want to give it away, but the ending for the last few chapters was so funny that my sides hurt from laughing. I literally have to put the book down and come back to it a few hours later because it was literally side splitting humor.
I agree, Andy. In fact, I have the kind of a bunch of them: Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, Prince and Pauper, Pudd'nhead Washington, Connecticut Yankee. Just a prolific writer, Mark Twain. You said his dates, and I think some of the themes we'll cover today, Andy, is this idea of the spirit of boyhood, like what adolescent boys are about. And I think of Twain, his era was somewhat when America as a country was kind of transitioning from infancy to youth to this like adolescent era. And I think there are some parallels there. And where does like resourcefulness come in? All of his characters are incredibly resourceful. Mm-hmm. They're also courageous and independent. We're going to talk in detail about that. And what does that mean for young people today? Friendship between Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn and Jim, and other characters in his works. And then laughing out loud. What about humor? How important is humor in getting some kind of point across? Does it undercut or can it enhance somebody's message? So these are some of the things, Andy, that I'd like to talk about today. And I think we agree the special emphasis will be on Huck Finn as the major work of Mark Twain. And I don't know if we want to, stay away from spoiler alerts, but I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I would say to everybody, spoiler alerts are in effect here if you're going to do justice to a great work of literary art. So everybody, hopefully everybody has read Huck Finn at some point, and if you haven't, read it or reread it. It bears rereading. Excuse me. There's a few things, and there's something, Robert. There's just something magical about the Mississippi River.
Yes.
that Mark Twain captures. It's like it cuts the heart of America, and it really is. This book is an American novel par excellence. Just a few details. First of all, Mark Twain grew up in Hannibal, Missouri. Right, the name was Samuel Clemens. He says, I think it's in Life on the Mississippi, another one of his books, which is nonfiction. He talks about growing up on the river, and there were different vocations that he aspired to as a kid. He wanted to run off with the circus at one time. He said, but the recurring one was always to be a pilot on a Mississippi riverboat, which he achieved. The river is so fraught with dangers and reefs and rocks and everything that to be a pilot, is a really important and difficult job. And he took his pen name, Mark Twain, from, in effect, that's the riverboats. That's out of all clear. You have 2 fathoms, right? 12 feet of water under you, which is enough draft for a riverboat. So that's where his name comes from. But, you see it in Tom Sawyer, but especially in Huckleberry Finn. It's all about, Huckleberry Finn is all about freedom, right? That's what the theme of the book is. Jim's an escaped slave. and Huck, you know, and Huck is escaping from civilizing influences of the widow Douglas, and so on.
Yes.
And so Jim needs to go north into the free states, and Huck needs to go west into the frontier to escape, the encroaching boundaries of a refined civilization. But the river's running south. The river's going the wrong goddamn direction. It's taking you deeper into slave country and deeper into this aristocratic kind of refined, plantation life that Margaret Mitchell captures so perfectly in another great novel, Gone with the Wind. The river's going the wrong way, But but despite all that, you're out on the river, and there's just this sense of not just majesty but freedom. There was they're on their own, they're independent, and it just captures that American yearning for freedom, which is all the more complicated because Jim's an escaped slave, and Huck was brought, as was Tom Sawyer, brought up in a white society where helping slaves escape is it's almost like a mortal sin. And so Huck thinks consciously, I'm a bad person. I should be helping the slave drivers, recapture Jim. And yet at some subconscious, implicit level, he's helping Jim escape. And he says at some point so many words, well, then I'll be damned. I'll be a bad person, but I'm not turning Jim into the slave drivers.
That's right, Andy. So that speaks to some of our themes again. Okay, right there is independence. Yes. How he does it is resourcefulness. We've kind of leapfrogged over somewhat of the buildup in the sense that both Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer have this huge amount of money, and now the money's put aside, and they want to civilize Huck Finn, and they want him to pray, they want him to do all these different things, and he tries really hard to eat food with a fork, and it just doesn't work. He's on his own. He's just used to being on his own, and he ends up leaving. And one of the proprietors he is the slave owner of Jim, and Huck Finn has this opportunity to turn him in, and even to heighten the conflict, Andy, which is what Twain is always doing. Great novelists do, is that Huck Finn he sneaks out, and the people in the town think that Jim murdered Huck Finn. So that's like even heightening the conflict here. And he dresses as a girl and goes into one woman's house, and it's just hilarious the way he tries, they see an insect, and he tries to stab it with his with a fork or something, or a knife. And just all these different scenarios that talk about the Mississippi, Andy. It's got houses floating on the Mississippi from this wreckage. And thank you for saying that, because we talked earlier episode Louis Armstrong and New Orleans. We could even say, like, whether it's Ayn Rand or Mickey Spillane with New York City as writers, but Mark Twain is a Mississippi. Nobody captures the Mississippi River. And when I've been many times from all the way up north, and in fact, I jumped over the Mississippi in Minnesota is where it starts. It's like this little puddle, all the way to New Orleans, St. Louis and Memphis, all these different towns. And I always think of Mark Twain. Like, wow, this is where this guy that we grew up as kids,
right.
as adolescent boys, Andy, right? We read about this man, and it's like, he's mischievous in one sense, but in another sense, he's independent. What 13-year-old boy can be out on his own today?
Right, right. No, you and I grew up in the boroughs of New York City. You in the Bronx, and I was in Brooklyn, and all kinds of adventures to be had there, and we certainly had them. But I read Mark Twain, I'm thinking, wow, 1835, he's born, so he's an adolescent in the late 1840s. The downside, of course, this is slave territory. And Mark Twain, of course, comes out against it, slavery in Huckleberry Finn. But I'm thinking, we'll get to that issue. but I'm thinking of just wow, what fun, what adventures we could have had, if we were, 13 years old in 1848, living right on the shores of the Mississippi in Missouri with canoes and rafts and fishing and hunting and playing pirate, and go and spending the night camping on some island in the middle of the Mississippi in 1848 when there's nobody, there's no nearly as many rules and regulations, and laws to, to prevent adventurous kids from having fun. And Mark Twain just captures that spirit of boyhood. That exuberant. What did they say? Little girls are sugar and spice and everything nice, but except when they aren't. But little boys are snaps and snails and puppy dog tails, right? And I mean, Mark Twain just captures the spirit of boyhood, and especially mischievous American boyhood so perfectly. And he's obviously kept that spirit alive in his soul because he's writing these books in his 40s and 50s, and it's still very, very, very much alive in him. And it's just, it's the spirit of youth that I think I love most about Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, as well. It's just that eternal spirit of youth, of mischievous boy. It reminded me, when I was a kid, there was a tree on my parents' block with a whole bunch of caterpillars. We used to call it the caterpillar tree. And I filled up an old, tea box, filled it and dropped them down the back of my sister's shirt, and she wasn't happy, but and caterpillars, girls don't like caterpillars, or spiders, but that's mischievous American boyhood, so Mark Twain captures it better than anybody.
And I think also the boyhood in the sense that he can deal with nature. Again, it's the people that he's not really, they're like the mystery, but nature's fine. Riding the mighty Mississippi, is one thing. And
Tom Sawyer wants to bring snakes and rats and stuff into Jim's cabin.
Say the snake episode, Andy, because that's actually interesting. So he sees a snake. There were two snakes. And one of them he puts it in Jim's bed, right? And it ends up biting Jim. And here's remorse now, because at first he was pulling a prank, but he's growing up before our very eyes because he's pulling a prank and he sees that this actually hurt this man. And his leg swells up, Jim's leg swells up. And Huck Finn is like, I'm not going to do that again. He understands that there are consequences to some of, some actions when there are other people involved here. So,
right. The book is so rich. It's serious. It's funny. It shows the horrors of the slave society. And I think we need to. Now, Mark Twain himself, 1835 and 1840s. This is long before the 13th Amendment and slavery in 1865. So he grew up in a slave society in Missouri, and he was able to overcome it. And writing decades later in the 1870s and 1880s, shows the inner conflict of Huck Finn, which is powerful. We mentioned it, but I think it bears repetition that Huck was raised in this slave society, and he thinks that's morally right, in his conscious thinking. But you mentioned the independence somewhere in his soul. He himself wants independence from what he regards as a repressive social structure that's going to make him do what they want him to do and not allow him the freedom to do what he wants to do. And he gets that. He's that American, that part so American freedom. Well, Jim deserves as much as I do. Jim has every right to be as free as I do. And you see the kid grew up in a slave society, learn from his experiences with Jim what a good person Jim is, what a good heart Jim has, how strong Jim's moral character is, and what a good man he is. And you see him. It's interesting. A human being, whether in fiction or in real life, their subconscious premises could clash with their conscious premises. Sometimes their conscious premises may be better. Sometimes they're subconscious. For everybody out there who's read Atlas Shrugged, and if you haven't, you should. Uh, um, Hank Reardon is a character whose subconscious premises are better than his conscious ones. And it's the same with Huckleberry Finn. Internally, he knows, or comes to know it, that the slave society is just flat out wrong. And if that's what's to be considered good, then I want no part of it. Let me be damned, with evil, because I'm gonna help this slave escape.
Yeah. Yeah. And Andy, again, heroes overcome obstacles. What about his father? His father's a drunk who beats the crap out of him relentlessly.
His father's a violent criminal is what he is.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just not noble. So already he could be considered like susceptible to alcohol and to abuse, because that's just so often it filters down from one generation to another, and that's not the case. That is just not the case, and it's really vicious. You really feel for him, and when his father does die, Jim protects him. He doesn't. Jim sees in this house that's floating by, Jim sees the dead body of his father, and he doesn't tell Huck Finn because he just doesn't want him to know that that bit of information. It's just not. It's not the right time for Huck
Huck's
to find
a kid, out. Jim's a man, and Jim protects him. Like Huck was his own son. He protects him from this very painful. I don't know how painful it's going to be. His father is such a bad person, but what would be normally a very painful realization that your father is dead. So and all through the story, Mark Twain shows what a good person Jim is.
Yes.
And
yes.
When Huck plays him that trick on him, that he said you were sleeping, and this was all a dream, and
the fog,
in the fog, and Jim's hurt that he liked him. He said, I wouldn't do that to my friend, and he goes off into the wigwam, and to be by himself, and Huck realizes that I did something wrong here. I hurt this man's feelings, who's such a good person. And again, Huck's still a kid. He's learning, and he learned. Like you said, well, I'll never play a prank on Jim, like that again.
Yeah, but he even teaches Jim and the language, foreign language, French language. I mean, that's just hilarious, the way Twain. Imagine trying to explain French to a slave who's not educated. Well, they speak different languages. Well, don't dogs and cats speak different languages too? And he's trying to conceptualize this, this idea.
The scenes. That scene's hilarious. Well, Huck's trying to explain to Jim why the French speak a different language than English speakers do. It's very funny. And then when you introduce the Duke and the King, these two con artists into the thing, who are not good guys. I mean,
no, they're not.
They're criminals, and they get justice, in the end. But they're really funny, in various. And you go down the river. They go, like, I think Huck says, like 1,100 miles. So he doesn't say where they end up. But it's got to be down, Arkansas. I don't even know what bank of the river they're on, in those final chapters. But it's got to be Arkansas, south of Tennessee, I would think. So it would be, Arkansas or Mississippi, way down the river from where they started out in Missouri. And this the adventures they have, and there's the incident, and Mark Twain is a great humorist, but he's also, showing some brutal truths. The feud between the clans, and the brutality of it, and it's just like one incident in a couple of chapters in the middle of the novel. But Mark Twain pointed out the insanity of this, these blood feuds between extended families that go on for years. you killed my uncle 3 years ago. Now I killed the adopted son of your nephew. And it just goes on and on. And Mark Twain shows a lot of, you can see he loves America, but he also shows the brutal truth about slavery, about clannish feuds, about the con artists and criminals, and just it's just there's flaws in the society, and Mark Twain doesn't try and cover it up. He shows it in the
yeah, and if we could just talk a little bit about humor. So by uncovering humor, the way I see it, Andy, is that's a way to make a point. To just like the way sci-fi can make a point that you might have more weight than if someone says something directly. It's kind of like dramatizing or just peeling off a layer. And to me, when you're laughing at something, that's when you're most ready to hear some kind of profound point. And with Twain now himself, we talk about the same, he's got the same characteristics, the same virtues of courage and independence as his characters. And he's making the statement that, yeah, these things are wrong, and I'm going to poke fun at them and expose the whether it's hypocrisy or the injustice that come about. If I make people laugh, they'll be, I think they'd be more open to the profound points that I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And there are comedians, who do that, who by poking fun.
Mel Brooks, I think, comes right to mind with Springtime for Hitler, right? In the producers.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
yeah,
good point. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's a good example. Springtime.
We could do a show on Mel Brooks. I just finished his biography. What a character.
Right, but and Mark Twain does. I mean, he brings out, amidst all of the fun of this story, we're reminded Jim is running for his freedom and even for his life, because, like you said, they think one, that Huck is dead, and two, that he was murdered by Jim, and that's very serious, stuff, and that Huck comes to be on board with this as the story goes on, shows his growth, from a kid brought up in a slave society who supported slavery to now somebody who's recognizes that this slave is as good a man as I'll ever meet, white, black, whatever, and he has every right to be free.
Yes,
and the Mississippi itself, the magic of the river, the role of the river in this story, the mighty Mississippi, so mighty that when it floods, it rips up whole houses off their foundations or whatever. They go floating down the river, and it's becomes this powerful symbol for freedom. We're escaping on the Mississippi. We're going the wrong direction, but we're escaping from slavery, and from for Huck, for the genteel restrictions of civilized life. And at the end of Huckleberry Finn, he decides he's going to go off into Indian territory, right? He's got the frontier calls for Huck. He's not somebody who's going to be a merchant in town or something. He's going to be a hunter, a trapper, cowboy, whatever. But the frontier calls for Huck.
Yeah, and Andy, that's a good point, because this idea of freedom, if we even look at America as a country, so mid 18th century, we see one example. Go into the mid 19th century, mid 1800s. If we go 100 years later and talk about going out west, it was the transportation then was cars, that people would just feel, still to this day, that they feel this sense of freedom. It's like, just leave me alone. I'm just going to get in my car and just go and just be on my own, out where nobody can reach me. And I think that's Twain is anticipating that with Huck Finn. So how about we just talk a little bit about the controversy of the novel? I mean, today it's not even is it required read? Did they take it off the list? Is it it's been banned in the past? It's not even
Yes.
just today that there's so much controversy about it.
Yes.
And so just what a lost opportunity for people to not have the chance to read this book, to school kids at least, to not have the chance to read this book because of profanity that was completely, Twain is poking fun at at these points, but today it's like you can't even, you can't even see that printed word in a book.
Yeah, well, you drop in the N word like practically on every page. But Mark Twain was not only writing in the 1870s and 1880s when that terminology was common, but the story is set in the 1840s in the slave society. So it was certainly common. So that's one reason the book has been banned. But I mean, first of all, I don't think books should be banned, period. Even if they're filled, I mean, I wouldn't ban Marx's Communist Manifesto, even though it's resulted in the murder of millions of people, or Hitler's Mein Kampf for the same, for the same reason. But also in addition to that, the story is very much about Huck himself rising above the prejudices of his day. He still uses the N word, but that's common currency in the world of his day. The more important is he comes to realize, one, that Jim is a good man, as good a man as he'll ever meet, and deserves freedom as much as anybody else. And by logical extension, there may be millions of black slaves who are good people. So
Yeah.
Huck comes to realize that, and it's a big part of Mark Twain's theme here in this story.
Yeah.
So the book's been enormously controversial for the depiction of black slaves, for the terminology, for the coarse language. But it's a literary masterpiece.
Which has changed, Andy, if we could just talk about that. So before Twain, English-speaking writers wrote in literary English. That was like the default. They wrote in this beautiful prose. Even American writers, Washington Irving, those writers who predated Twain. And Twain changed all that. He used colloquialisms. He used slang, and then nobody
and dialect
and dialect. Writing was not the same. At least American writing was not the same after Twain. Like he just broke ground there.
Yeah, I think it was Faulkner. I think William Faulkner said that Mark Twain created American literature.
Yes.
It's this distinct, and I'm not a big fan of Faulkner, I think, but I think he writes powerful stories. But anyway, we're not here to discuss Faulkner. But I think he's right in this case. That you're right, and what you said is right. American lit was never the same after Mark Twain. It breaks off from English lit in that sense of decorum that the great English writers and the early American writers tried to achieve into much more colloquialisms. It's much more informal. You could use foul language, and you could see it later on. Like I'm a big fan of hard-boiled detective fiction.
Yeah,
which is distinctively American. The English detectives are all very upscale and refined. And I love Sherlock Holmes. Don't get me wrong; he's one of my all-time favorite heroes. But Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and writers like that, writing about Sam Spade,
Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane.
Yeah, right, yeah, writing about Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe, and it's Mickey Spillane writing about Mike Hammer. These are much more informal. The language is much more colloquial. There's much more slang and cussing, and profanity. It's much more American. And Mark Twain started all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we could just move on with more of his biography.
Yeah, it's almost like, it's like in my mind, Huckleberry Finn is Mark Twain. Mark Twain is the novel
Yeah.
Huckleberry Finn. Just let me. There's one last thing about the novel. You can see why it has so long, by so many people, been considered the great American novel, because the great American novel has to capture the essence of American experience, and the essence of American experience, what makes it distinctive, is individualism and independence. That's what makes The Fountainhead such a great example, I think, of the
Yes.
Ayn Rand's novel, of the great American novel. But you see so much of that in Huckleberry Finn. The quest for freedom, the quest for the individual to be able to do his own thing. And one last thing, it's there's an element of that noble savage mentality here. That civilization is a corrupting influence. Civilization is what breeds slavery, and civilization is what makes Huck go to church, or wear shoes, or eat with a fork, or washes behind his ears, or whatever it is. And I just think that part of it's false. Because if you go into uncivilized places, you're going to find a lot of bad stuff there too. It's not just that you have muggers, or footpads, as they call them in England, in the dark streets of London. You go into places which are, savages. Well, you're going to find a lot of savagery. I don't think civilization's a corrupting influence. I just think I think people have free will. They make moral choices, and some of them make noble choices, and some of them make ignoble ones. But civilization is generally is a great thing. There's slavery in uncivilized societies, and I think Huck is fearful of a civilizing influence, but I think I think that's exaggerated. But for Huck, like I said, he's a frontiersman. So he's gonna be a frontiersman. So for him, the great benefits of civilization are kind of ways. Whereas for most of us, we want heat in our home, and air conditioning in the summer. We want a car. We don't want to have to ride on horseback in the driving rain. And things, and things like that. But Huck's a frontiersman. He's a tough guy. He's the kind of guy who settles the West. And so, for him, the civilizing influences are pernicious, whereas for most of us, they're very beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And also, if I could distinguish, there is some aspects of what we'll call civilization which are not civilized. Clearly, slavery is just one example, or of just forcing people to pray when they just don't want to, and they try it and they don't see practical benefits from it. So
right. It's a good point. There's a lot more slavery and brutality and coercion in uncivilized societies, savagery.
Yeah.
That the civilized societies just have not yet outgrown.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So just quickly covering Twain's life, he lived in New York City, where I've seen places in New York. Elmira is where he died, which is like up near up what we called upstate New York. And I went there. That's where he's buried. He got a lot of writing done there. And then Connecticut, there's a nice Hartford, Connecticut, nice museum. So even though born and raised in Mississippi, in the Midwest, he came east. He traveled all over the world. Was a great lecturer, humorist, like we said, just has incredible quotes as he was aging. One of my favorites of all of his quotes, the report of my death has been greatly exaggerated. What kind of comeback if you're...
Yeah. And he was a caustically witty critic of religion. Was it Letters from the Earth? Is that the name of his work, where he he has a number of things to say about religion that are to your point before, Robert, that are both insightful and humorous, wrapped up into one package. And I would recommend, I think it's Letters from the Earth, where he's humorously but sharply critical of a lot of religious beliefs. I would recommend it.
Yeah. Some other quick quotes. I mean, there's so many quotes out there, and many are attributed to him. We talked about the education episode we did, and he says, "I never let schooling get in the way of my education. Don't go around saying the world owes you a living. The world owes you nothing. It was here first."
Yeah, and I think speaking of religion, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it was Mark Twain who said, faith is when you believe in something you know ain't true.
Yeah, that sounds like him. That totally sounds like him. Yeah.
I think it was faith is when you believe something that you know ain't true. I think that was Mark Twain.
Yeah. So another thing about Twain, he made enough money, as a writer. And then he went out on the speaking tours, but he invested poorly. He wasn't really good with money. He invested in some high risk ventures and ended up becoming bankrupt. And then a financier helped him out, and then he earned enough money to pay off his debts, even though the bankruptcy didn't. They didn't think that was necessary. But here's the moral characters, principle that no, if I owe something, I'm going to pay it back, and just continued on as as Americana as it gets.
Yes.
As far as a writer, you want a picture of an American. There aren't too many others that you think of before Mark Twain.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's fascinating that he was really interested in science, technology, and inventiveness. He was long time friends with Nikola Tesla.
Yeah,
the great Serbian immigrant and inventor. And at one point, I know Thomas Edison visited him, and I think Edison was working. Might have been around the time when Edison was working on the motion picture projector, and I think he recorded. Mark Twain, on the motion picture cameras. So yeah, he was friends with and affiliated with a number of the great inventors and scientists, practical applied scientists of the early 20th century.
Yeah, and another hero that we covered earlier, U.S. Grant. When Grant was aging and sick, dying of cancer, and he was writing his autobiography, Twain was the one that got him a good deal with the publishing house, where Grant would get the bulk of the profits that came. So he helped a lot of people. He helped prominent people throughout his life, and I just think for his innovation in writing. As a writer, particularly Tom Sawyer, which we didn't even talk about, but that's that's part one of Huck Finn. It's a more advanced work, covers deeper themes. Huckleberry Finn, then his nonfiction, then just his character in, again, uncovering humor to expose some of these conventions that were hypocritical.
No, absolutely right. And Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer is a really good book. And, I know I would recommend it. And then Huck Finn is a sequel.
Yes.
But Huckleberry Finn thematically is much deeper, which is why it has the great reputation it does. Yeah, I would salute Mark Twain as an avatar of Americanism, whatever his flaws, and the realization of Huckleberry Finn, the character, and probably of Mark Twain, the person, both of them having grown up in a slave society and realizing that slavery is immoral, it's unjust, and it's fundamentally antithetical to everything that this country was founded on, and that makes this country great. And this quest for freedom that just permeates the novel of Huckleberry Finn and makes it the great American novel. So we salute you, Mark Twain. Thank you for these books that you wrote that both illuminate and entertain. So which is, and he is one of the great writers in American literature. So, any last words about Mark Twain before we sign off?
That's it. No, thank you, Mark Twain, for making us laugh and making a point.
Yes, well said. All right, everybody out there in Hero Land. Well, we will be back once again next week with more episodes regarding heroes and heroines to inspire us to be the best versions of ourselves. So we'll see you once again next week on The Hero Show.